Number 10. Ancient preserved brain. In 2008, archaeologists unearthed a human brain at an Iron Age site in York, England. Dating back some 2,600 years to the 6th century BC, it's the oldest preserved human brain ever found. Known as the Heslington brain, the organ was discovered inside of a skull that was found face down in a pit of wet clay. Project officer Rachel Cubbett told BBC that she noticed a yellow spongy material while peering through the hole at the base of the skull, adding it was unlike anything I had seen before. The brain belonged to a man who died between the ages of 26 and 45. Someone removed his head from his body using a small, sharp knife and probably buried it in the oxygen-free clay shortly after. This might help to explain why it was found in such good condition. The man's flesh, skin, and hair decomposed over time, yet his brain somehow stayed remarkably well preserved. Last year, a study found that certain types of brain filaments may have also helped to keep the Heslington brain intact, and that the man may have suffered from a disease that somehow affected its preservation. Number 9. Cinchoro mummies. Did you know that the world's oldest mummies aren't actually from Egypt? The Cinchoro culture developed their preservation techniques around 5000 BC, roughly 2,000 years before the ancient Egyptians. Most people don't know about the Cinchoro mummies, even though they were first discovered a century ago, but it took decades to figure out their age. Located in the Atacama Desert in the part of Chile that borders with Peru, the Cinchoro culture emerged around 7000 BC. Locals have often come across these mummies when they were building or their dogs would pull one out, but no one really knew how significant these finds were. These prehistoric hunter-gatherers were the first people to artificially mummify their dead. At first, only babies and those born premature were preserved, perhaps due to the high infant mortality rate at the time. The practice eventually spread to adults. There were 5 different types of mummies in the Cinchoro culture, which spanned over 4,000 years. The 2 most common types are known as black and red mummies. Black mummies were made by taking a person's body apart and reassembling it, while red mummies were prepared by removing the internal organs through small incisions and letting the body dry out. The dead were then stuffed with twigs and reeds and wore wigs and clay masks. According to the BBC, they would also attach thick black hair onto the mummy's head and cover its face with clay and the mask with openings for the eyes and mouth. They would then paint the bodies using natural pigments from things like ochre, minerals, and iron oxide. Their settlements in Chile's Arica and Parinacota region were declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site this year. Experts are hoping this newfound status will help acquire the funds necessary to preserve the mummies, which are increasingly under the threat of being destroyed by time and the elements. Number 8. The Holy Right Hand. Stephen I, also known as King Saint Stephen, was Hungary's first king. He was canonized in 1083 by Pope Gregory VII. When his remains were exhumed from his grave, his right fist remained perfectly preserved, even though Stephen had died decades earlier. It was severed from his body and preserved as a religious relic, known as the Holy Right Hand. The following year, a cleric named Mercurius stole Stephen's fist. At the time, stealing relics was so common that the practice even had a name, furta sacra. The stolen hand was soon recovered and spent several centuries at a monastic house. It moved around quite a bit after that, before ultimately ending up in the Hungarian city whose name I can't pronounce in 1420. The Ottomans occupied Hungary's central territories in the mid-16th century. During that time, the Holy Right Hand was kept in Croatia, Bosnia, and Vienna in Austria. It finally returned to Hungary in 1771, and in 1950 it ended up at its current home in St. Stephen's Basilica. Every year on August 20th, known as St. Stephen's Day or State Foundation Day, the Holy Right Hand is carried in a parade through the streets of Budapest. This tradition started in 1938, but was forbidden by the communist government in 1950. It resumed in 1988 when Hungary's communist regime fell. Visitors can view the Holy Right Hand by inserting a coin into a slot, which will light up the spooky display for about 1 minute. Number 7. Oldest ghost drawing. The world's oldest ghost depiction was recently discovered in the British Museum's vaults on an ancient Babylonian clay tablet dating back 3,500 years. The British Museum acquired the artifact during the 19th century. Dr. Irving Finkel, curator of the museum's Middle Eastern department, spotted the long-overlooked object while studying ghost-related tablets. At least half of the tablet is missing, and what's left of it is small enough to fit in the palm of a person's hand. It features a barely visible carving of a woman pulling a grumpy-looking bearded man into the underworld by a rope. The text is written in cuneiform, an ancient writing system that originated in the Middle East. It describes a ritual spell for getting a pesky male ghost to go away. Finkel told Life Science that he believes the ritual detailed on the tablet would have been used to exorcise a ghost that refused to leave a household and had taken its antics beyond harmless fun and games. Number 6. A massacre in the backyard. 2 years ago, Vitali Kvasha began digging in his yard in Siberia near the Chinese border with plans to expand his home. He started finding bones, and not just a few of them. As the skeletal remains kept turning up, Kvasha put them in flour sacks and stacked them against his house. Over time, the homeowner found the bones of 60 people and counting when he spoke with the media in late 2019. Government experts who were dispatched to the site believe that the mass grave dates back to the 1930s, when the Stalinist regime imprisoned and massacred political rebels. He said that he was rushing to finish digging before winter arrived and the soil froze. He had just removed 3 bones from the ground and knew that there were probably more to come. Kvasha seemed more annoyed than shocked. By then, he was ready to get the job done and over with so that he could proceed with his home renovations. Joseph Stalin committed horrifying atrocities in his bid to squash any and all opposition. Anyone who dared to speak out against the Soviet dictator was forced into a system of remote labor camps called gulags. Many prisoners died from starvation, disease, exhaustion, and other effects of the brutal conditions, which came with 14-hour workdays in extreme weather and meager nourishment at best. Executions were also common at these hellish establishments. Many people think that the Russian government avoids facing this shameful historical chapter. Based on his experience with finding the bones, Kvasha thinks this is entirely possible. He repeatedly asked the authorities to help him dig up the dozens of human remains on his property, but they allegedly claimed that they didn't have the money and resources to assist with the task. They only agreed to pick up the bones after Kvasha finished digging them out. This is much different from what happens in many countries when people make archaeological discoveries. Not only are people required to report their findings to the authorities by law, they are often discouraged from continuing to dig. This is so that professionals can study the objects in their proper context and excavate them without damaging them. So it makes sense that the Russian government's apparent lack of interest in studying the bones seems like an attempt to hide from its dark past. And now for number 5. But first, I wanted to give a big shout out to Haley Landry and Ubaldo Myers, who are some of our longest supporters. Thank you so much for sticking around. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the Origins Explained family. Number 5. Teotihuacan Stone Faces. The ancient city of Teotihuacan thrived in what is now central Mexico during the first half of the first millennium AD. Archaeologists have found hundreds of small stone faces among its ruins and believe that they were buried with the dead. Measuring just 6 to 9 inches wide, the ghoulish masks feature gaping mouths and big empty eyes that seem to stare blankly ahead. At one time, researchers thought that they were manufactured within the city and that they were made from jadeite. A 2014 study that examined 150 of the faces revealed that they were crafted at workshops far south of the city, although experts haven't pinpointed their exact origins. Their makers used limestone, serpentinite, travertine, and a rare volcanic rock called liswonite. The masks were polished with quartz, which isn't found near Teotihuacan, and helped tip experts off that they were made elsewhere. These findings proved that everything scholars previously wrote about the stone faces was untrue, according to anthropologist Jane Walsh. The masks and other artifacts found at Teotihuacan also reflect its far-reaching trade connections and vast wealth. Number 4. Saint Anthony's tongue. Saint Anthony was a man of Portuguese descent who became a priest in Italy during the 13th century. He was sickly for much of his early priesthood and spent a lot of time in the hospital. But when his talent for speaking was discovered, he began traveling throughout Italy and France, delivering powerful sermons despite his health issues. The papal court praised the man's speeches, calling them the jewel of the Bible. Pope Gregory IX declared Anthony the Ark of the Testament. He was canonized shortly after he died from edema in 1231. 32 years later, plans were made to move St. Anthony's remains from their original resting place to a new basilica that was built in his honor. When his body was exhumed, his tongue was still intact. It was reportedly wet and glistening, despite the rest of his body having decomposed. This was seen as proof of St. Anthony's gift for words and for teaching the Word of God. His tongue, jaw, and forearm were removed and put on display at the Basilica of St. Anthony of Padua, where they remain today. The rest of his body was entombed in a nearby chapel. Imagine having parts of your body exhumed, preserved, and put on display. What do you think of this practice? Creepy or normal? Let me know in the comments below. Number 3. Mutilated Stone Age Skulls. In late 2020, archaeologists announced the discovery of 2 human skulls and the skeleton of a young goat at the Cueva de la Dehesilla cave site on the Iberian Peninsula. The bones date back to sometime between 4,800 and 4000 BC, during the Middle Neolithic period of the Late Stone Age. They were found among structures and other artifacts from an ancient funerary ritual, including a stone altar, a hearth, ceramic pottery, stone objects, charred plant remains, and a stone slab called a stele. Both human skulls belong to adults, one male and one female. There is a depression in the frontal lobe of the woman's cranium, which also bears signs of decapitation and trepanation, a surgery that involved drilling a hole into the skull. The skulls and the goat skeleton were found on one side of a wall separating them from the altar and hearth. Researcher Daniel Garcia Rivero said that the differential treatment of the remains is a first among Neolithic funerary rites on the Iberian Peninsula. He further explained that the discovery is changing researchers' understandings of the death rituals that went on during one of the least understood Neolithic periods in the region. Number 2. OfukaCho mass grave. Last year, archaeologists excavated a series of strange circular holes containing the remains of 1,500 people and animals at the OfukaCho site in Osaka, Japan. Dating back to the mid to late 19th century, during Japan's Edo period, the bizarre burials contain humans, pigs, horses, and at least one cat. Officials discovered the graves near a busy train station during the construction of a new skyscraper. There were no grave goods at the site, leading experts to believe that the people buried there couldn't afford nicer tombs. Some of the remains bear signs of disease, so it's also possible that the individuals perished during an epidemic that swept through the area during the 1800s. In addition to finding holes crammed with bones, the team unearthed coffins filled with several bodies each. This further suggests that the graves contain the victims of a deadly disease. City officials said that the burials likely belonged to young people and children from the local area, which was a farming region when they died. It was the first discovery of a historical cemetery in Osaka, and its contents provide insight into the past burial customs of ordinary people. Scientists are studying the remains in an attempt to learn more about what killed the grave's occupants. Number 1. The severed head of Saint Catherine of Siena. Saint Catherine of Siena lived during the 14th century in Siena, Italy. She began having religious visions at just 7 years old, when she saw Jesus on a throne surrounded by saints. When she was a teen, she vowed to remain a virgin for life and devoted herself entirely to prayer and worship. Her family ignored her wishes and tried to marry her off, so she cut off her hair and became a nun. Catherine experienced the stigmata at age 28 while praying at a crucifix. 5 red rays shot out of it, piercing her hands, feet, and heart. People saw her levitating during prayer, and one priest claimed that the Holy Communion flew out of his hand and into her mouth. Catherine died in Rome when she was just 33 years old after having a stroke that paralyzed her from the waist down. The people of her hometown wanted her body, but knew they wouldn't be able to sneak it past the Roman guards. So they removed her head and put it in a paper bag, hoping they could slip by without raising suspicion. But the guards stopped them. The thieves prayed to Catherine to protect them, and when the guards looked into the bag, all they saw were rose petals. The head had rematerialized by the time the townspeople made it back to Siena. This is considered Catherine's final miracle. Today, her head sits in a reliquary in the Basilica San Domenico, and her thumb is kept nearby. Catherine's foot is rumored to be somewhere in Venice, and the rest of her body is in Rome. Thanks for watching! If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos like these. See you next time. Bye!